Welcome to the NBAV podcast.
Welcome back to NBAV and the NBA Avenue podcast. I'm coming to you today on March 1st. Third month of the year is here already, and we have a full list of the power rankings for odds of who can win the championship. We have 20 teams who are going to be in the playoffs, and the good thing is that we know which 10 are going to be in the playoffs from each conference. It's unlikely that the Nets are going to move in front of the Atlanta Hawks, even though the Nets beat the Hawks last night, and that moves the lead down to only 3.5 games. But we're going to assume the Hawks will win it, which they will. And the Western Conference, we know the top 10 teams. The Jazz are firmly out of it in 11. So we know which 10 teams we're dealing with in the East, and we know which 10 teams we're dealing with in the West. We've really known that for a very long time. I think like 30 podcasts ago, 30 episodes ago, I said that the top 10 teams in each conference really wouldn't change from here till the end. And that was actually, I believe, pretty accurate. So here we are, another 30 episodes later, and we know which 10 teams are going to be in the playoffs from the East, which 10 are from the West. And on a night where we didn't have that much noteworthy basketball last night. I know there were 8 games, but it was mostly matchups where you expected one team to win, and they did win, and they handled business. The one exception would be where the Spurs beat the Thunder. And I know a lot of you are coming on and you're thinking, hey, we're going to talk a lot Wemby. I'm not that guy. At NBAV, we're not ready to talk about Wemby until Wemby is playing meaningful basketball. I know they beat the Thunder last night, but let's be real, the Thunder could lose all the rest of their games from now till the end of the season. The Spurs could win all their games from now till the end of the season, and it would not make any difference whatsoever for either team. So, yes, good game. You won a game. Congratulations. It's only special that you won the game because you've lost almost all your games the entire season. So let's not get too carried away about Wemby. There will be plenty of time in the future to talk about everything that Wembanyama does on the floor. But let's do it when he's part of a team that's actually able to string together victories. Let's do it on a year where he can actually make it into at least a play-in game or at least a round 1 playoff series matchup. And then we'll talk about Wemby and we'll talk about his impact in real meaningful games. If you want to think that the Rookie of the Year between him and Chet has a lot of meaning, okay, you can go debate that on some other show, but we're going to be talking about the games that really matter. And for the most part, last night's games were the better team handling business. The Bucks beat the Hornets, the Magic beat the Jazz. You had the Suns beat the Rockets, you had the Lakers beat the Wizards. The Nuggets handled the Heat, even though Jamal Murray had a brief scare, but it seems like his ankle is okay. It's a sprained ankle, and he'll be game to game. They just weren't going to take any risks with the playoffs on the horizon, and the Nuggets now winners of 6 straight victories. They snapped the Heat. The Nuggets at 5 straight. The Heat would have been at 6 straight if they won, but they lost, so their 5-game win streak is snapped. The Nuggets now have the 5-game win streak, but they don't have the longest win streak in the NBA because that goes to the Boston Celtics. So without further ado, let's get into the playoff rankings. These are the rankings of which team is most likely to win the championship from most to least. So how could we do this? We could start it with least, or we could start it with most. I was planning on going highest because it's the easiest, but let's switch it around and let's go with the least likely to win the NBA championship to the most likely, and we'll see how it goes. At 20, we're going to go with the Eastern Conference team, the Chicago Bulls. Now, the Bulls, on their roster, they technically have quite a bit of talent. DeMar DeRozan is a lot better than he gets credit for, and then they have Kobe White, they have Vucevic, they have some players, but with Zach LaVine not being there, this team with the Andre Drummond, they've shown that they cannot be relied upon in any way. They're basically the play-in Chicago Bulls, and it's exactly the same situation that it was when Vucevic was on the Orlando Magic. Then they were the play-in Magic on that Vucevic-Aaron Gordon team. So now Vucevic is on the Bulls, and they are the play-in Bulls. Why is Vucevic and DeMar DeRozan, why are they not able to lead this team to a better record? I don't know, but it's been several seasons like this, and there's no sign of it changing. So The Bulls, I would say, of the 20 teams, I would give them the least odds of winning the NBA championship. And then we go with another Eastern Conference team at 19. And I would go with the Atlanta Hawks. Now, the Hawks have a worse record than the Bulls, but if you want to talk about one game play-in scenarios, you're going to be talking about the Atlanta Hawks and their dynamite firepower in these one-game situations. Trae Young is a stick of dynamite. You don't know, he's a grenade. You don't know when he's going to blow up. So when you stick him onto a big stage where he has a habit of actually performing very well, if you look at last season, the Hawks actually beat the Miami Heat in a play-in game. And then the Heat went on to win their next play-in game, and then they won all of their series all the way to an NBA Finals. But if you want to go back to before all that happened, take a little ride back in time, the Atlanta Hawks actually beat that Miami Heat team in that one-game playoff scenario. And that's where the Hawks, I believe, have a better chance than the Chicago Bulls, because in these one-gamers, the Hawks can win it, and then they're a frisky team come playoffs where you have Trae Young who can play at the top of his game. So there's a little bit more potential there for the Hawks than for the Bulls. At 18, I had the Orlando Magic, and for a lot of these teams at the bottom, they could be slightly interchangeable. It doesn't really matter. You could make a case that the Hawks can come up bigger than the Magic, but the Magic have been very consistent. They are going to be, a first-round exit. That's what they are. They're a very consistent team over at 18. They are the up-and-comers of the NBA. It's going to be them. It's going to be perhaps the Houston Rockets in the future are going to continue to build their team. Perhaps the San Antonio Spurs behind Wemby will continue to build their team and be some of the young rising teams of the next 4 or 5 seasons who are going to maybe hopefully compete for championships in 4 or 5 years from now. So you have the Orlando Magic, and then one spot above them at 17, I would put the Philadelphia 76ers. And the Sixers really could have been all the way at the bottom of this list, except we hope that the Wemby before Wemby, we hope that Joel Embiid comes back for the playoffs, and that would definitely, at that point, give the Sixers a better chance than any of the teams we've gone over so far. The Sixers, with a even half-healthy Embiid, would have a better shot than any of those teams, the Magic, Hawks, and Bulls. So the Sixers we have at 17. Going up to 16, now we finally touch on our first Western Conference team. We have the New Orleans Pelicans. Based on record, the Pelicans are still not in a bad position. They're in the 6th seed. But between the 4 and 8 seeds, there's only a couple of games separating all of those teams in the West. And the Pelicans were taking advantage for a while of a very easy schedule. And now that the schedule started to heat up, the Pelicans are not playing nearly as well. And I do see them dropping into the play-in by the time the playoffs roll around over these next 20 games and change. So if the Pelicans come into it as a play-in team with their very inconsistent play over the last while, I think the 16th best odds of winning the playoffs is about right for that team. They don't play basketball the right way. They have a lot of guys who try to win the ball game on their own. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum. They don't have a really good team passing-oriented brand of basketball, a team defense-oriented brand of basketball, and that lands them at 16. So we went off the bottom 5 teams in terms of odds to win the championship, and those are the Bulls, the Hawks, the Magic, the Sixers, and the Pelicans at 16. Now we go on to the top 15. In this next group, we'll start off with another team from the Western Conference that who've been extremely inconsistent, and those are the Sacramento Kings. The Kings, I put higher than all the previous teams because they did get a little bit of playoff experience last season. And the best player on the Kings is better than the best player on all of those other teams with the exception of Embiid, but they have health issues, and the Kings have an all-around better team. You have De'Aaron Fox on the Kings, you have Malik Monk, you have Sabonis, who, for what it's worth, is more of a stat machine than an impactful playoff contributor. But there's still time to change all that. They still have Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter, so their roster is a lot better than their record. Now, they're still pretty low down on this list because they've shown you with a sample size of 58 games that they are a team who doesn't even win 60% of their ball games. Yeah, they win above 50%. They're in the 8th seed, but it's really been a lackluster season, especially when you factor in where they were last season, near the top of the Western Conference, to where they are this season, barely scraping by. So eventually you have a sample size that's long enough, and you can't really get hyped on the Sacramento Kings any longer, and that's why they're at 15 on this list. At 14, one spot above the Kings, is the team who beat them last season in the first round of the playoffs, and that is the Golden State Warriors. Now, the Warriors are still currently in the 10 seed, and they would have to win 2 play-in games in order to get into the series, but I would still give the Warriors an overall better chance of winning than the Kings, because likely both teams will have to win at least one play-in game, so they'll both be in play-in games. But the Warriors, if they manage to make it out of those play-in games, and they get Wiggins back and he's playing well, there is a path forward for the Warriors to upset a Timberwolves team or a Thunder team and move up and move to the Western Conference semifinals and potentially have a path to an NBA final appearance. That is within their purview if they can get through the play-in games. Whereas for the Sacramento Kings, I don't really see that. Even if the Kings manage to win one play-in game and get into a real series, it's harder to imagine the Kings with their inconsistency and not winning a playoff series with this current group. It's very hard to see the Kings being able to take it any further and really making a dent in the playoffs for the 2023-2024 NBA season. So I would put the Warriors with slightly better odds of winning the championship than the Sacramento Kings. Then, if you want to go one step above, we have the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers are a half a game up on the Warriors, and there is talent on their roster. LeBron, in a play-in scenario, could put up a big game. He knows what time it is. He knows that it's going to be do or die. So LeBron could put up a very big game. You have Anthony Davis, who's certainly capable of putting up a big game. And then you also have Reeves, Rui Hachimura, and D'Angelo Russell. All of those guys are capable of playing well in the big moment, and they have playoff experience from last season as this group. And if you want to go back a couple of seasons, LeBron and Anthony Davis did win an NBA championship in the bubble. So this is another example of a team where the roster is certainly better than their record. So if the Lakers can manage to win 1 or 2 play-in games, however many they need, and they make it into a 1-8 or a 2-7 playoff series, they're a very live underdog. And of these bottom-tier championship aspirational, whatever the wording is, teams, the Lakers have a chance. I would say a slightly better chance than the Warriors at the moment, but you can really interchange that. The Wiggins not being there right now definitely hurts the Warriors, but we shall see. For the sake of this list, we'll have the Lakers one spot up on the Warriors. At 12, we're going to put the Indiana Pacers. Now, do I think the Pacers really have a shot to win the title? Not so much, but the Pacers are still going to be ahead of teams like the Lakers, Warriors, and Kings because the Pacers can avoid having to play any play-in games. So if the Pacers can just move ahead of the Philadelphia 76ers, who they're tied with right now, and the Sixers are in free fall, and the Knicks are also very short-handed, they are missing a bunch of their players, and they've lost 2 in a row as well. If the Pacers can just move ahead of any of those teams, and they're all right there bunched in together, between the 4 and the 8 seed, there's only 1.5 games separating 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 in the Eastern Conference. So where you take a team like the Pacers, do I think they have real championship aspirations? Not quite. But if they can just not have to play a play-in game, their odds certainly go up. And you take Tyrese Halliburton, and he's definitely capable of being the best player in a given playoff series, right? It's possible that Tyrese Halliburton, who has a big game gene in him, can rise above and be one of the most impactful players in a playoff series. Now, we've yet to see him do that because their team is so young, and the Pacers haven't really been in that position yet. And that's part of why the Pacers don't really have a chance, and that's why they're lower than the next 11 teams that we're going to name. But the Pacers at 12, slightly ahead of the Lakers and Warriors, who would have to do a lot of damage and play in games just to get there. Whereas the Pacers, there's a scenario for them to avoid the play in and just get a matchup. If you have the Pacers going against the Cavaliers in round one, that is a real series right there. And there's other teams that the Pacers can match up well against as well. So the Pacers in 12, going up to 11, we're back at the Western Conference, where we have the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, why is the team with the best record in the West? They're one game up on the Thunder now. With the Thunder losing last night, the Timberwolves have a full one-game lead. Why are they only at the 11th spot? Why are they outside the top 10 in odds to win the championship? You would think that if they have the second best record in the league, maybe they should be the second best odds of winning the title. But no, because this Timberwolves team has played a very weak schedule over the last 10 games or so. They've taken full advantage of that. They're on a 3-game win streak against bad opposition, but they still have a lot of problems, and their winning ways against bad teams are disguising a lot of their problems and their issues, which are they're bad in close games, and they're bad at protecting leads in the fourth quarter. So in any game that's close, when it comes down to the wire, they have trouble. Now, they haven't been in that position in a while because they've been winning their ball games outright, where the games have been largely over before they hit 4 minutes to go in the ball game. So they've been able to run away with these games. But that's a characteristic of a team that's very worrisome. When you're only good at winning games that aren't close, and when there are close games and they're going back and forth and there's 2 minutes to go and it's mano a mano, or you don't know if Edwards should be handling the ball or Cat, and you have Gobert in the mix, and it all becomes very confusing, topsy-turvy. You don't know exactly what your best move is, and there's confusion out there. That doesn't bode well for you in the playoffs. So where the Timberwolves are going to be a very high seed, most likely at this point they'll be a 1, 2, or 3 seed in the Western Conference, their odds of actually winning a title with a team with not much playoff experience, with a team that has a lot of confusion at the top and at the helm, it's very hard to see them actually beating a lot of teams in the West and making it to an NBA championship game. At 10, so now we've gone into the top 10. Our bottom 5 teams were the Bulls, Hawks, Magic, Sixers, Pelicans. Then in the second to bottom tier, you have the Kings, the Warriors, the Lakers, the Pacers, and the Timberwolves. And now moving into the top 10 odds of winning the NBA title. At number 10, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, Cleveland is tied for the 2 and 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. What's the problem with Cleveland is that they're playing their worst basketball of the season right now. They're not their hot, streaky selves that they were when they went on 2 big win streaks earlier in the year when Garland was injured and Mitchell was running the team. Now the Cavaliers are losing games. They are having confusion at the end of ball games. You have 2 guys trying to be the number 1. You have 2 kings, like we explained before, trying to wear 1 crown, and that's Garland and Mitchell, when it seems at this point it's pretty clear that Mitchell is the man. Whereas last season, there was a lot of Garland hype. You had a lot of the basketball nerds coming on saying that Garland is the guy of the future. They love Darius Garland's game, and last season he was kind of backing that up, that there was a chance that maybe he would be the better player than Mitchell, but this season you really can't make that case in any way. And frankly, it was still a little bit of a tough sell looking back in time. So you have these 2 guys struggling to figure out who's the main guy. Max Strus helped them out in that one game where he went crazy and he hit the 3-quarter shot buzzer beater for the win against Dallas. But you have a lot of confusion there. And Cleveland, you're playing your worst basketball entering the playoffs. That does not bode well for you. Not to mention, the Cavaliers would have to beat teams like the Celtics or the Heat or the Knicks or the Bucks in order to make it to a title, and it's hard to see this version of the Cleveland Cavaliers beating any of those teams. So that's why we have the Cavaliers at 10. Moving into the top 9, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, the Thunder are at 2 in the West, but they have no playoff experience. And when the ball games are going down the stretch in the fourth quarter and they're close, they do have a little bit of a lack of shooting, where they have players who they rely on, like Josh Giddey, who's really an unreliable player in terms of shooting an open three at the end of a ball game. So they have Gilgeous-Alexander, who of course is the steadiest force in the league. Him and Jokic and Luka right up there, right? All of them right up there with each other. But when they double team him at the end of a game, they're going to be heavily reliant on Jalen Williams, who is going to be entering his first playoff action. And they're going to be relying on Dort to hit threes. They're going to be relying on Isaiah Joe to hit threes. They're going to be relying on Josh Giddey to hit threes. And that's not a great place to be. And then you have Chet Holmgren, who can get blocks on one end, but he can also get taken advantage of by certain bigger and more powerful big men. So at this point, it's a give and take with Chet. Not to mention he does struggle putting the ball on the floor in these close games. He tries to play make, and that doesn't always work out in the Thunder's favor. So they've had a great, unbelievable regular season. But in terms of playoff aspirations for this year, it's not really there. Their championship aspirations aren't really there. Granted, I would still give them I'm giving them top 9 odds. So that's pretty good when you take into account that there's 20 teams in the playoffs and they're top 9 in terms of the odds of winning the whole thing. That's still pretty good for a team as young as the Thunder. And we're saying they have a better chance than the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have more experienced players like Donovan Mitchell on their team. And even the younger guys, even Mobley and Allen, have more experience than guys like Chet and Giddey. So it's a great accomplishment for the Thunder to be at 9 in the odds of, out of these 20 teams, 9th best odds of winning the title is pretty good. And the reason why they're there is because of Gilgeous-Alexander and is because of Jalen Williams and how incredibly consistent they've been the entire year. They're 41-18. They win nearly 70% of their games with this super youthful group. So that's enough to get them to 9. Now we hit the top 8, and this is where it gets really interesting. 8th best odds of winning the title, we'll go with the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix is currently in a 5 seed. And their next game is against the Houston Rockets at home, who they just beat at home. So they're going to be, the Suns are going to be winning this next game, and they're going to be firmly in the 5 seed. So if the Suns can just win enough ball games to stay in the 5 or the 6, you're suddenly going to get Bradley Beal back. So you're going to be walking a lineup in a first-round playoff series out, and your lineup is going to look as follows. Jusuf Nurkic, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Grayson Allen. That's a pretty good starting lineup right there. And then you're going to start to be able to use a little bit of that depth off the bench with Royce O'Neal. And you're going to be able to use Eric Gordon in spots instead of having to use him for long stretches of the game. And you'll have Thaddeus Young off the bench. You'll have Josh Okogie for energy. And suddenly, you look at that starting 5 and you think, the Suns have a shot. Do they have a top 5 shot? No. But I think they have a top 8 shot. You still have Kevin Durant. And let's only go back a couple of short seasons ago when Durant was on Brooklyn and he nearly pulled the upset against Milwaukee, where his foot was on the line and that turned his three-pointer into a 2, and they came up short where they could have won that game and put away the Milwaukee Bucks. But Milwaukee that season ended up going on to win the title. So the Phoenix Suns the Brooklyn Nets led by Kevin Durant were this close to making it to potentially an NBA Finals and having a real shot. And you've got to say that if the Suns are a 5 or 6 seed come playoff time, they do have a chance. Now, their roster certainly has issues. They struggle rebounding and they struggle defensively in terms of the big man department. Jusuf Nurkic isn't that great. He's okay on offense, hot and cold, but defensively, not great. Rebounding, okay. And then when he's out of the game, They don't really have anyone who can come in and take up those minutes and do a good job on the glass. So you kind of then become reliant on Durant to do that, which takes Durant energy out of other phases of the game, which is not a good position to be in. But yeah, do they have issues with their roster? Sure, but they also have a pretty freaking good starting five. So you get Beal back, playoff time, top 5 seed, top 6 seed. You're in business. You will have a shot to win the whole thing. Maybe not a top 5 shot, but you will have a top 8 shot. Then you have at 7, we're going to go with the New York Knicks. Now the Knicks are in a dangerous spot right now because they lost again to the Warriors last night. And the race, with them losing so many games, they're 3-7 in their last 10. And the Philadelphia 76ers are in the same boat. Without Embiid, they're also 3-7 in their last 10. And they both of those teams, the Knicks and the Sixers, have both lost their last 2. So you have the Knicks and the Sixers dropping. And now, between the 4 and 8 seeds, there's only a game and a half separating 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the Knicks are in a very dangerous position because if they start dropping from 4, they can very quickly be in 7 or 8 if they lose a couple more games. But they do bring extreme intensity every night. So the Knicks do have a good chance of holding on to the 4 or 5 seeds, or 6, and not being in a play-in scenario. They still have a really good shot at that. Not to mention, the Knicks will be a night and day different team when they have all their pieces back. The currently constituted Knicks, with the lineup they're sending out on a nightly basis right now, is nothing like the lineup that's going to be come playoff time. When the Knicks are able to roll out Jalen Brunson, along with the defense of OG Anunoby, and the scoring of Julius Randle, and then you add in Hart and DiVincenzo into that, and you have Hartenstein available for the whole game, and you have Achua coming off the bench, and I don't know if Mitchell Robinson's going to be back, but when you then have Bogdanovich coming off the bench, the whole outlook shifts because right now the Knicks are walking out guys like Hart and DiVincenzo and they're expected to lead the Knicks to victories, whereas come playoff time, when the Knicks are completely healthy, they'll be walking out Brunson, OG Anunoby, and Randle with those other guys backing them up. And that's night and day because you're turning the backups now into what right now the backups are the starters. When the backups go back to being backups, you suddenly go from having a below average starting 5 to having above average starting 5 and having an amazing bench. So the way the Knicks are right now, you can't really judge what they're going to be in the playoffs, but when they have actually their entire full team, which they haven't had the entire season, they haven't had Bogdanovich and Burks, along with OG and Randle and Brunson and DiVincenzo and Hart, all on the floor at the same time, all available for a game together. They've never had that. And the way the Knicks play, and the way OG can seamlessly slide in and out of the lineup, and it doesn't really matter because the way he plays, he'll fit with anybody. And that's really most of the players on the Knicks. DiVincenzo, Hart, Hartenstein, Mitchell Robinson, Jalen Brunson. All of these guys can freely move in and out of the game, and the brand of basketball that they're playing with tough defense, good ball movement on offense, tough running inside, trying to get offensive rebounds. The Knicks will be a very scary team when they're fully healthy. So I would give the Knicks 7th best odds because when the Knicks are facing off against the Milwaukee Bucks in the East, that would be a tough series. When the Knicks face off against anyone else in the East, it would be a tough series. The only team that I could really say is going to definitely beat the Knicks, where I would give them, an 80-90% chance of winning, would be the Celtics. But outside of that, the Knicks really have a good shot at beating anyone. So the Knicks are good enough to nab the 7th spot in the Eastern Conference. The only reason why the Knicks aren't higher is because it's possible that they'll drop into a play-in. They're only a game and a half out from being an 8 seed right now. And if the Knicks aren't going to be healthy for the next few games and they lose those next few games, they could be in an 8 seed. And unfortunately, maybe playoff time, the Knicks are 7 or 8. And now the Knicks have a chance of not even making it in. So you can't give the Knicks a top 5 chance of winning the NBA title this year, considering that the way things are currently laid out, they're in danger of dropping into a play-in. So that's what keeps the Knicks at 7. Now you go to 6. And at 6, I have a team that I'm high on, and it's the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks are currently in the 7 seed. They are 8-2 in their last 10 games. They're playing some of their best basketball of the season. They are consistent. The only game, one of those 2 games that they lost was when they got beat by a Max Strus 3-quarter shot buzzer beater. But really, the Mavericks could be 9-1 in their last 10. They're consistent. They improved the team around the trade deadline. And they are poised to move ahead of the New Orleans Pelicans, who are half a game up on them, and the Mavericks can get in the 6th seed. If the Mavericks are in the 6th seed, they are going to be the dark horse to win the NBA title. Because they have the player in Luka who could be the best player in any playoff series, and that's literally the best. He could be in a series against the Denver Nuggets, and there's a possibility that Luka plays better than Jokic. I wouldn't say his odds would be better than Jokic, but he has a chance, and that's there aren't many guys who you can say would play in a playoff series that Jokic is in, and they have a chance at outplaying Jokic. Luka does have that chance. He's that kind of guy. He's a miracle worker on the court. They call it Luka Magic for a reason. So the Mavericks, with this roster, with all the changes that they made to it around the trade deadline, bolstering it, getting PJ Washington, getting Daniel Gafford, bringing back Dante Exum. They have Derrick Jones Jr. around the edges, adding that to Luka, Kyrie, Hardaway Jr. This is a great roster, a really great roster. And if they had these guys, everybody healthy the entire season, they would probably be a top 3 or 4 team in the West right now. So the Mavericks, with those improvements, I would give them 6. So at 10, we had Cleveland. At 9, we had the Oklahoma City Thunder. At 8, we had the Phoenix Suns. At 7, the New York Knicks. And at 6, the dark horse, the Dallas Mavericks. Now there's 5 teams remaining, and the 5th spot will put the Miami Heat. Miami has worked themselves into an 8th seed right now, but they are only half a game back of 3 other teams. So if Miami's able to just win a couple of ball games, they will be firmly in the playoffs. They won't need to play the play-in game. But even if they do play a play-in game, it doesn't really bother them. They played in the play-in last season. They actually had to play 2 play-in games last season, and they still made it all the way to the NBA Finals. So they've shown that they can do it already, and that's why they're so high on this list. First of all, the Heat can move firmly out of any play-in games. They can move into real playoff series. And secondly, even if they're in the play-in, they can still have a chance of making the finals. So that's what puts the Heat over at 5. Going on to 4, we have the Los Angeles Clippers. And they're really there begrudgingly because the Clippers right now aren't playing their best basketball. Except for the immediate few games after the trade bringing over James Harden, where the Clippers looked horrendous. The Clippers right now are playing their worst basketball of the year. They blew a game against the Lakers that they had in the bag. They are playing without Paul George right now. But they're 37-20. With Harden and Paul George, if they're healthy for the playoffs behind Kawhi Leonard, Kawhi has a history of doing amazing things in the playoffs. And this is going to be the best team he's had since that Toronto championship run. And I would wager that the Clippers right now, you could make a case that in some ways they're better than that Toronto team. I wouldn't say they're as deep. I would say that Toronto team was deeper because they had guys like Van Vliet and Lowry coming up big for them in the title, in that championship that they won. And they had Siakam playing well in that series as well, maybe not always on offense, but certainly on defense. So they had maybe a little bit of a deeper roster and Ibaka as well, I believe, on that roster. So they had a deeper roster back then when the Toronto Raptors won, but you still have Kawhi Leonard going with a powerful trio of Harden and George. So in the Western Conference, if they get them all healthy for the playoffs and Kawhi is the best in any given series, begrudgingly, I would have to put them at number 4, despite the fact that they could very easily lose any of those guys, Kawhi, Harden, or George, and their chances would be effectively extinguished. But the Clippers will have them at 4, just ahead of the Miami Heat. Then at 3, we'll put the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks are playing better now. The Bucks have a championship roster. We knew that they would be in the title discussion when they made the Damian Lillard trade, because this was a roster who a few seasons ago won the title already, and now they just got one of the best offensive players in the game. I understand Lillard has made them a lot worse on defense. They've had a lot of struggles. They're too reliant on the three-point shot with Lillard and Lopez. They've been playing worse over the last 20 games than you would ever imagine. Doesn't matter. They have a championship roster. And when you put Giannis and Lillard and Middleton and Lopez and Connaughton and Beverly all on the court at the same, playing in the same game in a playoff series, Giannis is going to be the best player in most of those series that's happening in virtually every series in the East. He'll be the best guy on the court. They have a real shot to win the title. The number 2 chance to win the title, we would go with the defending champs. And that is the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets are the 3rd best team in terms of record in the West. They have won 5 games in a row. They're heating up at the right time. They are only a game and a half back of being the 1 seed and having the best record in the West. The only thing that's a little bit worrisome about the Nuggets right now is the health of Jamal Murray and his ankle, but he has plenty of time to rest up and get that right before the playoffs. We're still over 20 games away. As long as they can keep Murray healthy and you get playoff Murray going out into the playoffs, the Nuggets will have the best chance of winning the West and going on to defend their title and compete for the NBA championship. But at number 1, we have one team ahead of them, and that's the Boston Celtics. And I'll give the Celtics a better chance at winning the title this year than the Nuggets because the Celtics have been the best team by far the entire year. They've run away with the NBA. The Celtics are 8 games up in the Eastern Conference on any other team, and that's enormous. The Celtics have won 9 games in a row. The Celtics are virtually unbeatable at home. The Celtics, even if you want to include the Western Conference teams, the Celtics are still at least 4 games better than any team in the NBA. They have the playoff experience, they have the best roster, and they're the most dangerous, they're the most consistent team in the league. And they've never had a stretch at any point in the season where they haven't played good basketball. So you combine all of those factors, how they have the best roster, how they have the most consistent team, how they have so many weapons that can beat you, and how they defend home court, the Celtics are going to get the number 1 spot on this list. I don't think that's really a very hot take. Celtics at 1, Nuggets at 2, Bucks at 3, Clippers 4, Heat 5, Mavericks, Knicks, Suns, Thunder, Cavs rounding out the top 10, and that's going to do it for the list. Coming up on tonight's NBA action, the Cavaliers will go ahead and take care of the Detroit Pistons, although the Cavs are struggling right now and the Pistons are heating up a little bit, so maybe it'll be a better game in Detroit than you might think. The Hornets and the 76ers are going to battle each other. The 76ers in much need of a victory, and they should hopefully get it tonight against the Hornets, who are struggling to score above 90 points in any given game. The Warriors are playing very well right now, even in this past game against the Knicks without Andrew Wiggins. The Warriors are going to face the Raptors, and that's another winnable game for the Warriors that they have to take advantage of, and they should. The Dallas Mavericks are going to go face off against the Boston Celtics in a very, very, very tough matchup. Boston is the favorite in any given game, especially on their home court, and they've won 9 in a row. So Boston will look to take the NBA's longest win streak. They've had a couple of nights of rest, and they're going to come into this one ready to go and defend Boston Garden in beating the Dallas Mavericks. That will be the most likely outcome. Then you have a garbage game. You have the Blazers against the Grizzlies. You have the Kings, who have lost a couple in a row now. they're going to go against the Timberwolves, who are playing good basketball. So this is definitely a live game. The Timberwolves probably not as good as their record shows. They've benefited from an easy schedule. So we're going to have a good game tonight. The Kings against the Timberwolves. We'll see if the Kings can show a little bit of fight coming down the stretch here and get a victory in Minnesota. Then you have the Pacers going against the Pelicans, and the Pacers and Pelicans are in similar positions, one in the Eastern Conference and one in the Western Conference. The Pacers probably have the upper hand in this game because they've been playing all-around better basketball, whereas the Pelicans have been playing more one-on-one basketball, where they each try to score themselves, and they just played. This is a rematch. They just played in their previous game. The Pacers played the Pelicans, and when it came down to the fourth quarter, the Pacers were ahead, and the Pelicans couldn't put a dent in that because they don't move the ball very well, whereas Tyrese Halliburton is always able to create a quality shot for the Pacers. So we'll see. This is always a good showing of pride. Do you have the pride when you play the same team back to back and you lose the first one? Do you have enough pride to go out there and take the second one, or will you get swept? Will you get swept and lose both of those games back to back? I think that the Pacers will win again because the Pacers are heating up. The Pelicans are cooling down, and the Pacers play a better brand of basketball when they're committed on the defensive end, and they have Tyrese on the floor, and then they have the small point guard who also gives them good minutes coming off the bench. What's the name of the guy I'm forgetting? He's been in the league for 1,000 years. On the Indiana Pacers, that would be small point guard on the Pacers. Cannot believe him. TJ McConnell. There you go. TJ McConnell's been fantastic this season, and really for the past several seasons, he's been really, really good. TJ McConnell kind of does what I'm going off on a tangent here, but he kind of does what Tyus Jones did for the Memphis Grizzlies, backing up John Morant in past seasons. That is what TJ McConnell does for the Indiana Pacers. So the Pacers always have a good point guard out there, and they should be able to beat the New Orleans Pelicans in back-to-back games and get the victory tonight in New Orleans. Then you have, coming up after that, you have the Bucks going on to face the Chicago Bulls in a game that doesn't really matter very much for either team, but we should see the Bucks win because the Bucks are trying to hit a groove as we go down the stretch here, and the Bucks have been playing a lot better. So the Bucks versus the Bulls will give the advantage to the Bucks. Then you have the Wizards going against the Clippers. Wizards played a tough game in LA last night against the Lakers, and we should see them give another good effort against the Clippers tonight, but the Clippers should be able to get the victory no matter what, even if they sit most of their main players and they roll Russell Westbrook out there to try and win it. Westbrook and Harden probably would be enough to get the victory there. So we'll give the advantage to the Clippers, and that's going to pretty much round out your action. Keep an eye on the close 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seeds in the East, which are only separated by a game and a half. And keep an eye on the West, where the 5, 6, 7, and 8 are only separated by also a game and a half. So keep an eye on those playoff seeding battles. We are NBA Avenue, and you can follow us on social at NBAv and NBA Avenue, and you can watch the show on YouTube, listen on Spotify, and listen on Apple Podcasts and all the great networks. We are your source for a great time every time, and until next time, we are out.